In March of this year, my husband and I made the very difficult decision to temporarily move in with his parents. I was 7 months pregnant at the time, and we were struggling financially, so we decided to give ourselves 6 months with them to try to get back on our feet. Having built in help with a newborn baby was also pretty appealing to us. The four of us and our new daughter live together in a nice, boring suburban home that's far from the cliched haunted house. This house was brought brand new by my husband's grandparents in the early 90s, and when they died, his parents bought it. For some background, I'm someone who has had two notable paranormal experiences in my life. My mom passed away when I was 20, and there have been two times that she's visited me. I won't go into the details of these, but I'm absolutely certain of them, and that it was my mom. Despite these two experiences, I would consider myself pretty skeptical about most paranormal experiences. Anyway, last Wednesday around 2 am, my daughter woke up crying, and I took her into her nursery to feed and change her. Her nursery is at the front of the house on the front floor, with two big windows. We tend to keep the curtains on these windows open to let in light, and frequently forget to close them at night. I was sitting with my daughter in a rocking chair by the window, rocking her and singing, when someone whispered, "Hey!" and knocked on the window sharply 3 times. I ran out of the nursery and woke up my husband. He went outside to investigate with his gun, didn't see anything, and convinced me that I imagined it. I was anxious to believe him and eventually fell back asleep. 2 days later, my husband woke up to our daughter crying around 3 am. Her crying didn't wake me up, so he decided to let me sleep while he took her to the nursery to feed and change her. The next morning he told me, "I didn't want to wake you up last night and scare you, but someone knocked on the nursery window again last night." He had been changing our daughter when, bang, 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 there were 3 loud, sharp taps on the window. He calmly set her down and closed the curtains. As soon as he did, bang, 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 there were 3 more knocks. It unnerved him so much that he didn't even look outside. He just sat up all night with our daughter. After he told me, I was convinced that someone was creeping around the house at night. I insisted on telling my father-in-law and having him check the security footage from the cameras on the front of the house. These cameras have really sensitive motion detectors that notify him when there's any motion within their range. He never received any notification the nights we heard knocking, and went back and watched the footage from both nights in their entirety. There was nobody there. My in-laws told us that it was probably a squirrel or a bird. Although that explanation didn't make sense, I accepted it and didn't bring it up again. I did, however, move diapers and wipes into our bedroom so that we wouldn't have to go into the nursery at night anymore. A night went by with no activity, but last night I woke up in a panic around 2 am. When I opened my eyes, at the foot of our bed was the dark outline of someone who appeared to be 8 to 9 feet tall, just standing there watching us. I screamed, and just like that, it was gone. My husband woke up in a panic, but again, we convinced ourselves that it was nothing. That I had been half asleep, and that my eyes had been playing tricks on me. We were freaked out, but eventually fell back asleep. Would we be the people who would say, "Let's split up, guys, in a horror movie and die first"? Probably. The morning my mother-in-law knocked on our door early, around 7 am, which is very unusual. She seemed kind of excited and said, "You guys won't believe this, but last night at 2 am, something knocked on our bedroom window too. 3 times, just like you said." My scream hadn't woken them up, but around exactly the same time, the knocking had. I immediately texted my sister about it, who had tried to comfort me by saying, "Maybe it was Mom. Maybe she likes to visit you occasionally to check on the baby." But I know it wasn't her. One night, I was walking down my quiet hostel basement after parking my car. At first, I didn't notice anything weird when my car alarm went off. But then a string of events started to happen there. The lights started to flicker as I walked toward the elevator. I decided to take the stairs instead, just in case of electrical shorts. The stairway right up to my 7th floor room had no light, as it was a very common issue we students face in the hostel. As I opened the door to the staircase, I shone my hand phone light on the stairs. I took one step, and the second, and then I heard the door behind me creep open. I turned back and shone the light behind me, but there was no one there. My heart started to beat fast, so I started to take 2 steps at a time. I could suddenly sense that someone or something was following me from the back, but I didn't dare turn around to look if there was a person behind me. The air was chill, and it was pin-drop silence. Suddenly, my hand phone light goes off, and I stand there in fear of the dark, but I managed to switch on my phone back. Just as I was switching my phone back, I felt a small blow on my neck and into my ears. I could feel someone standing at the back of me at that time, so I took the courage to get my hand phone light back on. I walked up the stairs with my shivering legs in fear, and my thoughts were, I just want to go back to my room now. Suddenly, I felt a hand pushing me forward and I fell. I tripped over one step and fell forward, hitting my knees on the ground hard. Every level would have this mirror up in the ceiling for security reasons, since it was the girls' hostel. I looked up and something was staring back at me. Something that got stuck up the ceiling looking at me as I grabbed my handbag. I jerked up a little in shock to see her up in the ceiling and then pretended not to see her. So I grabbed my handbag and sprinted up to my floor with my hand phone light. As I reached my floor, I saw light and I was relieved. I walked up to my room with heavy breathing, and I could feel my heart was pumping extra oxygen to my brain. I managed to open my room door with the keys with my wobbly hand. I switched on the light in the room, and that's when I saw my room curtain move a little. My windows are always locked, and that day, my windows were locked, and my roommate hasn't come back from her house yet. I thought to myself, whatever it is, I'm not disturbing you, so don't disturb me. I went into the bathroom to take a bath, and after a while, I heard my dressing chair move a little. The sound of the chair was obvious, because the chair had metal legs, and when it screeched against the floor, it made this annoying friction sound. I thought my roommate was back, and I opened the bathroom door to greet her, but the room was empty. The stack of newspapers that we collected for our research projects was all scattered on the floor. The fan was not on and the window was not open. How was this possible? This continued for 3 months in my room, with or without my roommate, but we chose not to entertain it much. My friends and I planned a vacation trip during our 3-month semester break. We got ourselves checked into 2 different room for people, 2 per room. Little did we know was our room was haunted. The one I stayed in with another friend of mine. That evening, we decided to just dip our feet at the beach. As we were playing in the water, my friend suddenly yelled for help, and we looked back just to see her being in the water current and further. She kept yelling for help, till some of them around us managed to pull her from the water. Some said that they don't usually go swimming in the water because they believe there's something in the water that our naked eyes cannot see. We didn't think much of that and thanked those who rescued my friend from the water. My friend did say that something was pulling her into the waters and wanted her to drown with it. We told each other that we were just tired from the travelling and decided to walk back to our rooms and take our bath later. We decided to order in, as the incident really traumatized our friend badly. The other 2 of my friends came over to my room, and we had our dinner as we chatted till 2:30 a.m. Then we decided to go to bed, so the 2 other friends went back to their room to sleep. I didn't notice anything strange going on with my friend who almost drowned in the water moments ago. I switched off the lights and went to bed. An hour passed, and at about 3:45 a.m., I woke up to drink water, and that's when I saw something really dark sitting at the end of my friend's leg. I cannot see without my glasses properly, so I quickly grabbed my glasses and looked at the foot of the bed again. No one. My friend was fast asleep, and I didn't think much about this, so I went back to bed quietly. Next morning, my friend woke me up, asking me to look at her shoulder. It was like a bite mark, and the whole area was blue and black, but she claimed she felt no pain when pressed. Then I decided to tell her what I saw when I woke up for water, and she was really freaked out. She said she thought she was dreaming when she saw that figure sitting at the foot of the bed too. Then we heard a loud crash in the bathroom, and when we opened the bathroom door, we were rooted to the ground. The bathroom mirror and a shelf behind the mirror fell into the sink. The mirror was broken. First of all, how did the shelf at the back of the mirror drop? Second, what triggered the mirror to shatter into pieces suddenly? So my friend had an idea to record ourselves in the room that day. As we recorded ourselves in the room, everything seemed normal till we decided to go back into our recording. I know a video would be more exciting here, but we had to delete the recording as I didn't want to keep it. There was this weird looking head that would pop out as if it was saying hello to us from the bathroom door. We thought it would be better for us to just check out from that hotel and head back home after that. This incident still traumatizes and scares me to death. I was to do my practice in my school as a librarian for 3 months. Every morning, I would sweep and mop the library floor and then start to arrange the books on the shelves. Then I would key in all the new book entries on the computer. I have the habit of bringing a bottle of holy water with me, and I would place it on the table where I sit. Since it was the major exam month, the library would be lonely, as the students and the teachers would be going back from school to their house after one paper that day. Only some students and teachers would come to the library to study and borrow books. Most of the time, I would be alone in the library, so I'd play some music as I arranged the books on the shelves. One day, as I was taking the log books out from the drawer, I accidentally spilled some holy water on the floor, and to my shock, the area started to smoke a little. Although it was hard to see the smoke with my naked eyes, I sensed something was amiss in the library that day. As soon as I got up in shock, the APD, the media room, doorknob behind me, started to twist and turn frantically. I stood at my place and looked over the counter to check if someone was there, and to my horror, I saw a shadow at the bottom of the door. I rushed out of the library and had to walk over to the APD room, which was next door to the library, and turn the doorknob slowly. It was locked. So, whose shadows did I see in the APD room just a while ago? The teachers have decided to carry out a camping session in our school after a month of our final exams. They thought we would be more relaxed with fun-filled games and sleeping in tents that they provided us. After the games, that night, my friend and I wanted to head to the bathroom, so we walked slowly while chatting and laughing in the bathroom. As we headed to the bathroom, I spotted a figure that looked like one of our subject teachers. That figure was walking into the cooperation room and closed the door behind her. My friend quickly turned over to the camping site, which was situated in the foyer, but we didn't spot her anywhere. "Didn't we just ask her permission before going to the bathroom?" my friend asked me curiously. Someone couldn't walk that fast to that room from the foyer, because there's a mini staircase that we have to climb down to the ground floor. "I have a bad feeling now. Let's go back to our tents," I said to her immediately. We paced back to our tent and realized that our teacher was sitting in the footsteps of the staircase as she filled up our food from the next day. We decided to ask her if she was the one who we saw entering the cooperation room. Our teacher said she was sitting there all the time and she didn't have the keys to that room. We were shocked and told our teacher what we saw that night, and she claimed that this similar incident happened to our sports master 2 days ago when they were having the school football tournament. One of the players saw someone who looked just like their football coach walking all over the school when the football coach left right after the event due to some emergency that day. This continued to happen till I graduated from my school, and we never attempted to visit our school at night. My friends and I decided to go do a 3-day trip to Pulau Langkawi, Malaysia, after our graduation, just to celebrate our freedom. We checked into the girls' hostel for some hostel experience, and we planned to take a walk because the weather was nice that day. We had so much fun together, and then we turned back to our room as it was getting late. We took our bath and lay in our beds and started to chat with each other again. Everything was normal that night, but when it was time to sleep, we decided to keep the lights on since it was a new place. In the middle of the night, my friend woke me up suddenly, saying that she wanted to head to the bathroom and wanted me to accompany her. Bathrooms are allocated at the end of the rooms outside because it was a traditional hostel style. So I got up and followed her to the bathroom in my half-sleepy state. I saw her going into the bathroom and I followed her inside. I had to wait inside while she was inside the cubicle. It was quite a while since she went in and she wasn't out, so I called out her name and knocked on the door. No answer, but the door was locked. Since it was an old hostel style, there was a huge cement tub in the bathroom for fetching water for baths and others. The water, as we know, comes directly from the mountains, and that's why the water is always refreshing and cold. The maintenance people there would switch off the water generator once everyone goes to sleep. So as my friend and I entered the bathroom that night, I knew that the generator was switched off and the tub was filled. When I called my friend's name again, and this time a little louder than before, the generator switched on by itself and water was overflowing on the floor. I panicked and continued to knock on the door for my friend in the bathroom. I noticed that the water in the tub started to bubble up, as if someone was trying to breathe underwater. My heart started beating. I didn't feel good about what was going to happen next. So I quickly opened the bathroom door and rushed out, and there was my friend looking at me in shock. She told me that she was waiting outside for me to come out of the bathroom. I told her that she went to the bathroom first, and that's why I followed her, but she denied it. So out of frustration with her denial, I opened the bathroom door to show her that the water generator was switched on by itself, and the water was overflowing on the floor. As soon as I opened the door, there was no water overflowing on the floor, or the generator was on. My friend denied that she heard me calling her name in the bathroom too, so we decided to go back to our room and talk about this the next day. That morning, when I narrated the whole thing to them when they woke up, one of the girls from the hostel said that they had heard someone singing in the bathroom when they knew no one was in there. They also said they have seen a woman in a white dress roaming the hostel who loves to sit under the huge banyan tree all night long. It seems the history of that hostel is when a woman committed suicide because she caught her boyfriend cheating on her with another woman in that hostel. So that's why the woman in white roams around the hostel to get her revenge. And so far, 12 girls have died mysteriously there. It was our luck that we escaped her on time. My family and I took a vacation trip to Port Dickson during my school holidays. So we planned to go to the beach, and my sister wanted to collect seashells there. I helped her turn to collect the seashells, and we had lots of fun on the beach trying to collect them. We headed back to our room for that day. Since it was just a day that we spent in that hotel room, nothing much happened that day. It all started once we got back home the next day from Port Dickson. Back at home, my sister washed all the seashells that we collected on the beach and placed them in our room. We were sharing rooms till now. Whenever we were in a room with no one upstairs in the house, a soft banging would be heard from the bathroom beside our room. One time, the television channel switched by itself while my sister was watching her show upstairs. Our room door would sway in and out even without the fan being switched on sometimes. These incidents kept happening in the house, and we decided to tell our mom. Our mom suspected that the seashells were the cause of these mysterious happenings in the house. That day, my mom's friend came by our house to visit my mom, and she could sense something was not right in the house. She immediately asked us if we brought back anything from anywhere, and my sister looked at me in shock. Her friend said that the things that we brought back home weren't supposed to be there and should be released and open running waters immediately. Till now, I'm too afraid to ask my mom's friend what that thing was in our house that made the banging sound from the bathroom. The moment my sister threw the seashells into the open running water and came back home, everything was back to normal. No banging from the bathroom was heard, and no weird switching channels or another weird phenomenon around the house. P.S. Be careful when you collect seashells, because they may look pretty, but it's dangerous. A beach is a place where some people would dissolve dead people's ashes into the waters, so the ashes might get attached to the seashells, so do not bring them back home. Just release them back to the waters. I sincerely promise that this has scarred for me for life. And while I have investigated psychological and natural explanations for what I heard, they remain unsatisfactory. I was terrified of the dark as a child. I swear to my mother that I heard voices in there. They weren't evil, but they were unfamiliar, which scared me. It wasn't uncommon for me to wake up in the middle of the night and hear whispers, as I referred to them when I asked my mother. She assumed they were just bumps in the night and typical childhood nightmares. I tried several times to convince her that it was more than that they sounded different from one another in the same way that people's voices do. Some nights I was so terrified by these whispers that I slept in my mother's bed with her. It was also convenient that the bathroom was right outside her bedroom door for my late night tinkles. I should mention that when you walked out into the hall to use the restroom, you looked directly down the stairs that led to my living room on the first floor, as my mother's bedroom was on the second floor. I awoke one such night around Christmas with the need to relieve myself. As I walked out the door, I heard the words, "Look," and to my surprise, a red light, almost like a spotlight, was cast upon the wall at the bottom of the stairs. I was transfixed by the light because I had no other source. I knew that this light was because I was a little kid, and it was only a few days before Christmas. Santa Claus. How else could he have gotten into my house and found out I was being a good boy? I started down the stairs to greet him, picking up my pace after the second step, as it started to creep off the wall and fade into the darkness in my living room. That's when I noticed him. A powerful, masculine voice. In contrast to the first, it wasn't at all like my father's, but that's not to say he isn't masculine. It was just noticeably different. It stated, "Stop! At the moment! Return up those stairs!" I listened, turned around, and what happened next is something I would not believe if told the same story. When I got to the top of the stairs, I heard a loud crash, which sent me running back to my mother's bed, where I jumped right under the covers and stayed all night. When we awoke the next morning, the poinsettia lights, small Christmas flower lights that glowed red, that my mother had placed on the railing down the stairs, had been pulled straight down, some broken from what appeared to be a forceful tear and laying in a single pile. My living room's dry sink had fallen from the wall. My mother had no explanation. My father was concerned that we'd been the targets of a home invasion. My sister was in tears. Nothing was missing, no one had broken in, and there appeared to be no reason for this to have occurred. And then I saw it, and I kept quiet about it because I was so afraid that I couldn't force myself to say anything. There were 3 indentations where the finish on the wood had been worn, almost as if it in a force or grip, on the edge of the wooden dry sink that had been facing up. Something had grabbed it and thrown it down. That was the source of the bang. I was embarrassed. I never heard another voice after that day. I don't like to think about what was waiting for me downstairs that night, if anything at all. But I can tell you that something had physically acted on the 2 things in my house, near the bottom of the stairwell. After that, I never heard another whisper. This is unfortunate, because I would have liked to thank the man, muscular energy, who stopped me from falling down those stairs. This happened when I was 7 years old. I'm now 20 years old, and I'm still afraid of the dark as a result of this incident, especially dark stairwells. Once, when I was staying at my brother's house and watching my niece, they set up the baby camera so I could watch her on the tiny TV that came with it. When I heard some whispering while I was studying and started to nod off, I realised it was coming from the monitor. When I turned to look at the television, there was a dark shadow close to my niece's crib. At first, I assumed it was kind of some feedback or something. I've never felt more terrified in my entire life, but it was obvious that the shadow had appeared where it had not before. I hurried to my niece's room and looked around, but I couldn't see anything, so I dragged her out of there immediately. When I returned to the TV, the shadow was obviously gone. When I told my brother what had happened, he pulled me aside and warned me not to tell my sister-in-law about it for fear she'd freak out. He also said that he had witnessed the same incident several times before, complete with the same whispering. They remained in that home for roughly 4 more years, and during the early stages of my niece's speech development, she would tell her mother about her special friend. It still terrifies me to this day. My brother informed me that when they left, my niece had become terribly depressed because she would miss her friend. Her mother would reassure her that she could bring him along, but would only state that he was not allowed to leave the house. She apparently never saw the damn shadow, despite the fact that we have never told her about it. It wasn't until much later that I learned what it was called. In Laguna Beach, I was residing in a home built in the 1920s. It had previously served as a speakeasy, a brothel, and a place to hide illegal immigrants. My wife and I fought one day. I even forgot what it was about now. I was left alone in the house while she went down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off. The construction of the location was incredibly careless. On one side, there was a bedroom, a living room, and a bathroom with 2 entrances. A hallway with windows on one side and 2 bedrooms on the other was located on the opposite side of the bathroom. I could see into the bathroom from my bedroom, through the bathroom, and down the other hall. I was seated at my dresser when I briefly caught movement out of the corner of my eye and glanced down. There was a black figure, and goodness, just typing that gives me goosebumps. The only way to describe it is black scribbles that appear to have been drawn in the shape of a human being. However, the scribbles moved, resembling electricity arcing. I don't believe there was any sound. I recall that when I first saw it, I was not afraid, but rather puzzled. I then realised I was observing it. I wouldn't say it turned around, I think it just seemed to be focused on me. I then felt afraid. I was frozen because it just came at me and rushed down the hall towards me. I didn't move, didn't scream or do anything. The door was as closest to me and I slammed shut on it as soon as it entered the bathroom for reasons I cannot fathom. I yelled. I called out to my wife. The house was empty. I went outside in the daylight and didn't come back in for about 10 minutes when she finally arrived home. I don't think ghosts exist. Although I don't think I saw anything supernatural, I have no idea what it was. I learned how to use Google Maps from a friend. It enables you to look at locations all over the world using satellite images. I was involved in a car accident a few years ago. I haven't left the house that often since then. It's challenging, and the thought of seeing a car pass by me makes me dizzy. I was enthralled by how much of the world I could see without being there. It almost felt as though I was there because I could virtually walk through the streets. I was immediately hooked. It helped me see the world more clearly. I could travel to almost any big city, and I did. In so many different countries, I had seen streets in China, Japan, Germany, and England. Even tourist destinations like the Great Barrier Reef and the Castle of Dracula had been visited by me. My favourite activity was to visit arbitrary locations in big cities and count how many peoples and animals I could find there. Even though the people's faces were always obscured to protect their privacy, it was still enjoyable to see them live carefreely. I chuckled, she must have good taste. I enlarged the image to see her grey bag, which is attached to a purple and grey shoulder strap. One hand was trailing the wall beside her as she walked comfortably. If I could have seen her face, I'll bet I could tell she was grinning. I started to get a little depressed. I continued to look at her for a minute before allowing my hands to rest on the wheelchair's arms. I wished I could have joined her as we strolled along carefree, but that wouldn't happen until after my passing. I was confined to the seat. I sighed and accelerated away from Tokyo. That's enough for tonight. After shutting down the computer, I went to sleep. Early in the morning, I made the decision to explore Paris. I zoomed in at random and noticed an area with a street lined with historic brick buildings, a few small businesses, and a historic tan brick church. There was an intersection up ahead, and many people were walking by. I turned the view a few more times before noticing something odd. Two people were seated on the bench at the bus stop. One of them was a young woman, standing there with her feet relaxed in front of her. She was sporting similar red sneakers to mine. I was momentarily startled when I saw the black hooded jacket, white t-shirt, and black pants. She had loosely tied back her dark brown hair. The strap of a grey bag, which was sitting on the bench next to her, was draped across her shoulder. This is crazy, I said to myself. There's no way that this is the same woman. This is a different nation, if not an entirely different continent. How was she involved? This was foolish. It wasn't like these were real-time photos. They were taken in advance and then put away. She wasn't like that, simultaneously in two places. She might simply be a traveller. Furthermore, it was impossible to identify the same person without seeing their face. The world's most popular hair colour was probably brown. I thought those red sneakers on the internet. A million other people undoubtedly did as well. Shaking my head, I started to prepare lunch. I chose to look at Berlin when I got back online. As usual, I chose a random street. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted something as I was about to leave. I shifted my perspective, and there they were, those frightful red shoes. She was positioned next to a signpost on a street corner. She appeared to be waiting to cross the street with a hand on the post and a downward gaze. I gasped in disbelief. How could she also be present? There's no way I could consistently locate her, even if she was on the move. This? Even finding her in Paris would have been an incredible coincidence. This was absurd. Was this a joke of some kind? Had Google chosen to play a practical joke on the customers who used their product so frequently? It would have made for an amusing joke. This was absurd. Had I gone insane from my own self-imposed seclusion? Had I grown so depressed from the loneliness that I imagined a hallucination for myself? I texted a friend to ask him to look at the locations after leaving the Berlin image on my screen. If he had seen the same woman, I questioned him. I then waited while my heart was pounding and my hands were clammy. 10 minutes later, when my phone beeped with a returned text message, I jumped. The writing said, "In Berlin, I ran into the woman you're referring to. In Paris or Tokyo, I didn't run into her. What kind of game is this exactly? Are you alright?" Instead of responding, I went back to the Tokyo and Paris locations. She was there, she was present, but things had changed. In Paris, she stopped sitting on the bench at the bus stop. She was searching a bag as she stood in front of it. She was standing a few blocks away in Tokyo and knelt down to pat the calico cat. I trembled. Who was she? What was going on? Leaving Tokyo, I searched for Brussels. Another city street it was. She was absent. Sighing in relief, I couldn't believe how worked up I was about this. My eyes remained fixed on the screen as I stopped. It was just a coincidence. I switched to Sydney. She was leaning against the wall, inside the doorway of a bright blue Carrick's pharmacy building. My heart felt like a terrified bird, slamming around inside my chest. I couldn't catch my breath. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't call the police. Should I send the screenshots to Google? I shut my eyes and clenched my fists tightly. Who was she? Was she coming after me? Was she pursuing me? I wished I could see her face and understand what she saw when she turned to face me. I wanted to get up and leave the chair. Why did the only thing that allowed me to feel free once more make me feel even more trapped? I had to be aware. I entered the name of my city and then zoomed in on an arbitrary street. The gates to the city park were visible in the clarity of daylight, even though it was night here. It was a few miles from my house. She was there. She was there, actually. She was standing beneath the ironwork arch that bore the name of the park, not far from my home. She gave me and the camera a direct look. I thought I might vomit. She was standing close by and keeping an eye on me. She was headed my way. What was she seeking? I entered the name of the residence I reside in. I could see the building's exterior. There were numerous vehicles parked in the lot, and a few blurry kids that were playing on the playground. I looked all over for her. She wasn't hiding between the buildings, in the parking lot, on the sidewalks, or in the playground. Even the cars, the areas behind the bushes, and the obscured windows were all scanned by me. She was absent. I rolled up into a ball, placing my head on the desk. It was safe to be here. I stayed inside the apartment all the time. Never again would I use Google Maps. I would never again see her. I couldn't care less if she stayed at that park. I surprised myself by grinning to myself as I noticed a tear starting to fall down my cheek. I whispered to myself, I'm safe. It was satisfying to hear it aloud. I'm secure. There was a knock on the door as I was saying it. My spine began to tingle. To help me with my mobility issues, I had a camera connected to my computer that showed who was at the front door. To prove to myself who was outside, I slowly reached the control, but my hand shook violently. I realized my error as I reached for the control. The only part of the building that was visible in the last Google image I had seen was its exterior. Only the exterior. I turned my head to the screen and noticed a woman carrying a grey bag with a purple and grey striped shoulder strap. She was wearing a white t-shirt, black pants, and a black hooded jacket. There were, of course, the red sneakers. Her face was still completely blurry as she stared straight at the camera. She raised a hand and loudly knocked on my front door as I struggled to hold back a scream. My mother and I currently reside in Western Oregon. She's very outdoorsy, so when I went to see her over the summer, we decided to drive the hour to the coast from her city. We were the only campers at this free campsite at the Forest Hill, which is a sizable foothill of the coastal mountains and can be reached by car in about 25 minutes. We decided to unwind for the rest of the day as soon as we arrived at our destination. In the middle of the night, I heard my mother gasp and was startled to see her sitting up straight in the tent. She put her hand over my mouth as soon as she realized I was awake, because I was beginning to ask what was wrong. We suddenly heard footsteps right next to our tent while it was completely silent. The small flap over the zipper was also moving. Then we saw a silhouette, a few of them. We knew they were not humans because they started making growling noises like animals. We heard the leaves rustling and branches twitch and break as they crawled around our camp. What are they? A few silhouettes look like humans, but they growl like animals. My mom told me to keep my voice down as I panicked. Finally, the footsteps stopped. We had a hard time sleeping back in our tent, but managed to. Then suddenly, I woke up to someone humming and I looked at my mom. She was sleeping peacefully beside me. Humming in the woods? To my horror, against the fireplace, I could see a female figure standing facing our tent. She stood there for a solid 5 to 10 minutes just looking at our tent. Then I heard her softly laughing in a deep, creepy voice. My goosebumps raised and I shook my mom to wake up. I told her what I saw outside the tent, and my mom opened the tent and checked. Nothing was harmed or lost. The woman disappeared into thin air without making any noise. How is that even possible? Then the next day, without any hesitation, we packed our bags and left the forest. One of the forest rangers told us that this forest had someone called the Guardian, and many have experienced her presence there. What got me bad was the humming and her laugh in the middle of the night. When I was in college, I returned home every other weekend to work the job I had since graduating from high school. After my final class on a Friday, I would drive straight to my job, and then after my shift was over, I'd return to my parents' remote home. When I returned from work, my parents weren't yet home, so the yard and house were both dark. I parked in the spot I usually use, got out, and then turned to unlock the back door and remove my backpack from the back seat. Is that light still on from when I arrived? Of course it was, right? I was looking at the lights and reaching for my bag when an elderly woman walked up to the window. I could tell that she was upset with me because this wasn't a bitch face that was just resting. My hands started shaking as her eerie face stared back at me. When I first looked up, there was a short woman holding a stick and making a clunking sound with it. I assumed the elderly woman was dressed in all black. The more I focused on her, the harder it was to distinguish any other colour because it was becoming blurry. If I'm not mistaken, it was an elderly grandmother who turned to face me while sporting a black headscarf, but made no facial expressions. The woman in the bathroom and I stood there looking at each other for a good 10 seconds before my parents' car pulled into the driveway and called my attention away from her. The light was still on when I turned around, but the woman was gone. Who was the creepy old woman I saw? My housemate is a nurse, and she used to volunteer at one of her nursing homes near our campus. I once volunteered at a nursing home where we had new residents and former residents who the staff and I knew had passed away in that room, and complained about them entering the room at night. We could identify these people by their nightgowns or their glasses, for example. Then, as I was moving through the hallway, even though it was boiling hot inside, I experienced a chill and goosebumps. I just walked through a ghost, one of my fellow colleagues said to me. After that, I was unable to regain my previous level of warmth. Lights started to flicker, and TV started to turn on by themselves. The staff members, who were all from the same Southeast Asian nation, were discussing ghosts and disrespect for the deceased. As a result, the management invited someone to perform a prayer, and it was said that a woman wearing a red dress and dreadlocks was roaming in that nursing home. I don't know if she was out for revenge or just finding a place to stay till she flies away over her world. After the prayers and saging, things started to calm down. The residents appeared calmer and the lights stayed on longer. When I was still working there after that, I didn't feel any chill or paranormal incidents. My friends and I were chit-chatting in the common area at our hostel one late night. We had just finished our classes on our campus, and the next day was declared a holiday for us. We were planning to drop by this new mall that has opened recently, 2 blocks away from our hostel. Then, one of my friends, Maya, tried to scare us by saying that the newly built mall is built above the Japanese soldier burial ground. We didn't take her words seriously, as we thought she would always pull our legs. We laughed about it and started to scare each other with our own haunted stories. I told one of my babysitting haunting incidents to them, and surprisingly, they were spooked out by this incident. Moving on, we wanted to continue our spooky experiences with each other before heading back to our rooms. One of them told about how she saw a female figure sitting below a banyan tree during her teacher's training days. She even described what that figure looked like and how my friend was afraid after looking at that figure. Just then, one of us wanted to make it scarier. She switched off the light suddenly and made funny noises. We jumped out of fear and started to laugh when she switched on the lights back. We were having so much fun when all of us heard boot sounds coming right outside our common area. They sounded as if they were marching in one direction and coming closer to our common area. Maya thought the guys from our hostel were practicing their marching, but I wondered why they were practicing their marching at this odd hour at night. I slowly peeked out the common area door, which has a small peep window above. I didn't see anyone walking or even marching along that hallway. I looked at my friends and shook my head, indicating I didn't see anyone outside. Everyone in that common area started to panic, and they came closer to me to see if they could see anything outside. The marching sound was still heard, but there was no one outside our common area at that time. The marching sound became louder and louder till we managed to back up a little from the door out of shock and fear. Then we heard a pair of boots hit the door hard, as if that person was kicking the door open. I took the courage to look back into that small peep window on the door, and again, I didn't see anyone at the door, but the sound was still heard clearly. Then it stopped abruptly. We quickly took our things and opened the next window opposite the common area door, and jumped out of it without looking back. The window leads us to the other side of the hostel floor hallway, so we had to take the long way back to our rooms. I reached my room and quickly unlocked the door to enter. My heart was thumping hard, and I thought it was just a dream, as it was my first time experiencing this. I took my bath and headed off to bed that night without thinking about what happened, or what I had heard that night. The next day, Maya gathered all of us and told us what she had read about our hostel history. She told us that our hostel was built on the Japanese soldier burial ground, and that was why we could hear the marching boot sounds last night. I tried to dismiss her story and not want to be scared anymore, but Maya showed us some images from her laptop about our hostel and its history. So it was true that my hostel was built above the Japanese soldier burial ground. The seniors in my hostel and campus confirmed it by telling some creepy and spooky stories about the boot sounds and voices of the Japanese soldiers preparing for war. I had to bear with all these sounds and voices for 3 years before completing my degree. Sometimes I've seen shadows of these soldiers marching down the hallway. Once every few years, all throughout my life, I'm currently 27, something strange and inexplicable always seems to occur when I least expect it, which rarely has much to offer in the way of rational explanation. Examples include atypical electrical weirdness, only in my presence. Inanimate objects move out of place while alone. Multiple instances of UFO phenomena, dream visitations by deceased relatives, and the one instance I'll share with you all here. This particular experience dates back about 5 years ago and took place on a back road in the Appalachian Mountains of western North Carolina. It was sometime after dark, and an ex and I were driving back to the town we lived in at the time, located a couple hours north of Asheville, after visiting family there for the weekend. It was a clear summer night, and there was very little traffic on this country road. The weather was nice, and we had the windows down to feel the breeze. We weren't saying much, just listening to some musical podcast or something. After seeing no one else for at least 10 to 15 minutes, we rounded the corner onto a long straightaway stretch of road, about a mile long that's visible, clear to the next curve in the road. As we rounded the bend, another car's headlights could be seen rounding the opposite corner, coming in our direction with the high beams on bright. While most drivers tend to dim their lights when approaching oncoming traffic, this one didn't. This prompted me to flash my lights to try and remind them their brights are on, which I'd tried multiple times to no avail. At this point, my ex and I were a bit flustered, and were commenting on how obnoxiously powerful some cars' headlights can be sometimes, just ready to pass this person. Just as we came within about 10 yards from passing each other, the oncoming lights shut off completely, and there was nothing there. No car could be seen. Nothing was heard whooshing past us as we passed by with the windows down. No tail lights were seen in the rearview mirror. Both my ex and I went rigid, and our hairs stood on end. She just solemnly cut off the stereo, and we sat in silence for what felt like forever, before verifying that the other person had seen it too, and trying to make sense of it. I had little doubt of the paranormal at this point in my life, but my ex was much more skeptical, even after this happened. albeit less, than she'd been prior. Nothing much out of the ordinary seemed to result from this encounter, at least not what I could directly attribute it to, but it's a vivid memory I think of often. There are other odd happenings I'd be glad to share with anyone who's ever interested. I'm one of the most skeptical people I know, and I'm someone who is constantly wrestling with wanting to have a spiritual faith, but the rational, scientific side of me always kicks in. But I can't deny that the house I grew up in had something going on in it. My family and I have never talked much about it until we got older and realised all of our experiences correlated with each other. I grew up in an old brownstone row house. Here's some things that happened. Always a feeling of being watched, especially in one area of the basement. Always a sense that someone was behind you. We all felt this. And one time, I actually felt a hand touch my shoulder. We always left the bathroom light on upstairs. The way we had the living room set up, when you're sitting on the couch, you can see the stairs and partially the second floor bathroom in view. Many times when we'd be sitting on the couch, we'd see something walk by the bathroom upstairs. A babysitter once thought someone broke in when she experienced this. One night, when I was about 8 or 9, I could hear what sounded like two old ladies dabbing it up and having a good old time downstairs in the living room. It took me 2 seconds to run from my room to my mom's. Several times I'd hear footsteps up in my mom's room when I knew I was the only one home. Several times when we'd be sitting in the living room, we'd see what looked like someone poking their head out of the kitchen. We all would experience what felt like someone sitting on the foot of our beds. A mirror in the dining room was flung off the wall and crashed into the living room in the middle of the night and broke into a million pieces. The TV in my bedroom would turn on and off by itself frequently. A lamp in the living room would often turn on and off. I noticed it happened whenever it was one of our birthdays, and when it had happened, you'd actually hear the switch turn. Mum would wake up to hearing running around in the hallway, thinking we were up goofing around, but we'd be sound asleep when she went to check on us. Mum woke up to a man standing next to her bed, and sister had the same experience. Another sister kept waking up one night because all the lights in her room kept turning on randomly. We had those old big flap-style peepholes in the doors in the basement. One time, I was just sitting down there watching TV and could see in the reflection of a picture frame a face peering through the peephole at me. That was the one time I really got scared. I just got an evil vibe, but that was the only time I got that vibe. There's probably so many more things that happened that I can't think of, but I always wanted to go back to the house and do like a ghost hunt. The funny thing is, I never had paranormal experiences since I moved out of that house, which was 10 years ago. I never really talked about these experiences with people other than my family. I thought I'd share it on here. I'm 20 years old, and I've lived in a small Canadian town of 10,000 my entire life. It's a rural farming community, and the bountiful forests and fields are most often my getaway places. I enjoy the outdoors, from going on hikes to planning days out to look for animal bones, but I never thought anything slightly paranormal would come from my adventures. April 2nd, 2016. The snow had melted before I was slowly woken up by the sun, revealing itself for the first time after a long, harsh winter. As I woke to light shining through my curtains, I pulled them back to see grass. Sure, it may have been brown and dead in most spots, but I could see the ground and wanted to make the best of my day. Almost instantly, I had something I can't quite call a desire, but the urge to go out and look for bones. It felt as though something was pulling me out of the woods, telling me to come find it, but I dismissed it as my excitement for such a nice day. There were a few spots I had in mind, as country roads are good for finding a bone or two, so I gathered my things, packed up my bag, and headed out. I live in a neighbourhood that's roughly a 10 or 15 minute walk that leads out of town to a few trails. I began my walk down the road, keeping an eye out on the passing fields and ditches for anything that might pique my interest. The road I was on is a main back road used quite often, with 3 houses that sit on the hill leading out of town. One of my favourite homes from my town is one of the three on the hill. Its location is tucked away by trees but still visible from the road. The family has an outdoor chicken coop that always brings a smile to my face whenever I pass it. Continuing on after making my way down the hill and past the homes, I was walking along the ditch, actively looking for anything that resembled bone. Roughly not even 5 minutes had passed when I noticed something that looked like a bag, but upon further inspection, I realised I'd found my first bones of the year. The entire skeleton was intact. I noticed it still had some fur on some parts and was trying to piece together what sort of animal it was. Now, because I was in a ditch, and due to the skeleton's location, I didn't stay for more than a minute or two, but took some photos. I continued walking, but was cut short when a friend called and asked to hang out. I mentioned to her my find and that I'd be back in town in less than 10 minutes. Walking back, I stopped to sit for a second to glance at the photos. After a few minutes of looking at the teeth and the paws, I was hit with this deep, instant feeling, and I knew exactly what I had found. I hadn't seen the posters for a few weeks, but I knew what I had found. It was this gut feeling, so strong and assuring. My mind went back to the posters I'd seen around town. December 2015. I walk everywhere, snow or shine. It was December, the first time I saw the missing poster for a small dog named Squeak. The posters were everywhere. They were laminated, and each time they were taken down, they'd be replaced soon after. It was evident that whoever owned this dog loved, cared for, and deeply missed their friend. Back to April 2016. After telling my friends about what I discovered, even if it wasn't Squeak, we knew we should at least contact the owner. I waited 2 days to phone the owner and learned quite a lot. She was a lovely older woman who loved her dog more than life itself. Through our conversation, I learned that Squeak wasn't a local and actually lived an hour away in the heart of Toronto. Had a sister who missed her and also discovered her owners were quite wealthy. Squeak's owners have property down in the States. In October 2015, they were going there to their second home in Arizona and dropped both of their dogs off at an animal resort about 20 minutes outside of my town. 2 weeks pass and they return to pick up their dogs, only to be told that a week earlier, Squeak had managed to get out with her sister. Only one could be found, and after a week, the search was called off. During the entirety of our phone call, it was clear this lady loved her dog, and even months later, was still using the present tense while talking about Squeak. She seemed almost unfazed when I mentioned my discovery. She didn't shut me down or dismiss it. Every lead was important to her, but this was a lady who was really holding on to the hope that her dog was still alive. And what she told me next made me understand. I'd never heard of an animal psychic before this incident, but the owner had contacted two. A lady who lives in Arizona and is apparently pretty famous down there for it. She never mentioned her name. And another local pet psychic from Canada. The stories were both similar. Squeak was somewhere safe and warm, not far from where she was last seen. They couldn't tell where she was, but they could see she was inside of a house and being cared for. Of course, now learning that, her hope and optimism all made sense. The owner isn't local, so she put me in contact with a lost dog search group that had been looking for and spreading the word of Squeak's disappearance. The owner and I say our goodbyes, and I get to call the local search group. This is where things get weird. I called the searcher that Squeak's owner had put me in contact with, explained the story to her, and agreed to meet in an hour's time so I could take her to the remains I had found. I was giving her directions to the road and casually mentioned the house with the outdoor chicken coop, as I often used the house as a place marker. The second I said the word chicken, the lady stopped talking and went very quiet. She then began asking what the owner and I had spoken about, and I briefly ran over the conversation, including the detail that the owner had spoken to two psychics. The lady was a little confused, as she revealed to me Squeak's owner had contacted 3 psychics and not 2, as I had been told. The third animal psychic had spoken to the owners, revealing a more morbid reading, which is why I believe the owner had only mentioned two over the phone call, because no one really wants to hear or believe that their beloved dog has died. The third animal psychic had described to them that sadly, Squeak was in a lot of pain, couldn't move her legs, and for some reason, Squeak was within hearing distance of chickens. As soon as those words left the woman's mouth, I was in disbelief. The remains weren't more than 200 yards from the chicken coop, and I just couldn't understand how someone would have been able to pull that information out of nowhere. I still get chills up my spine thinking about it. Finally, met up with the searcher and showed her the body. It had been 2 days and the skeleton wasn't as intact as when I first discovered it, but after inspection, she gave me her personal opinion that she believed this was in fact Squeak. I was told a few days later that DNA testing would have been done in order to confirm it, but sadly, only the mother of Squeak was still alive, so they were unable to determine it. I've never met someone who loved their dog so much and have never had such an unexplainable, spine-tingling experience in my life. To this day, Squeak is still missing. I'm currently working a 3 to 11 shift 5 days a week, staying in an 8th floor apartment building, and I'm on the 3rd floor. Not that it's too important to this particular story, but the previous tenant of my apartment also died at the front door. So I've already experienced a few weird things here, but anyways. I smoke weed and sit out on my balcony to do so. But a few weeks ago, I noticed a smell outside that I recognized as a dead mouse, because I've dealt with them before, but this was different. I sit right next to my air conditioner, which sits in a box in the wall that's boarded up during the winter. And we only recently put it in, so I thought maybe it was just a mouse that got unlucky in the wall, but I couldn't smell it inside of the apartment. It had been around a week and a half, and on my days off I realised you can't smell it at all until around 10:30 p.m, and it dissipates around 4 a.m. Honestly, right off the bat, I knew something was wrong. The first night was okay, but it quickly came to the point where I was physically unable to sit outside. And my mom was always asleep, so I couldn't ask her if she smelt it because it would disappear before I could ever ask. I'm really big into true crime and read about cases of bodies being discovered all the time, and what the smell is like, and how once you encounter the sweet smell of death, you just know. I knew what I was smelling. I knew something was dead, and I knew it had to be human, but I felt insane until finally last Wednesday, I woke my mum up at 3 a.m. to finally confirm what I was smelling, and she could too. I told her I was convinced there's a dead body near us, but she kept assuring me it was probably a mouse, because by this point, the smell was coming up from under our sink. I told her that day we need to tell someone as soon as possible, and she said she'd put it in a complaint, because it's probably a dead mouse in the wall behind the sink. I went out of town Friday until today, when I came home to my mom telling me that yes, there was in fact a man discovered deceased in the apartment directly below us to the right. We later found out it's a man who's lived in the apartment for 10 plus years, but no one really knows him. He has no family and rarely ever left his house. I'm a big believer in the paranormal, and now I think there were signs that his spirit was trying to help someone find his body. I could only smell it from 10:30 p.m. to 4 a.m, and we found out the gentleman would only ever leave his house or sit on his balcony at night. Why wouldn't I be able to smell it during the day? Is there a reasonable explanation for this? There's also an elevator in the building. I'm on the 3rd floor, like I said, and the past few weeks since the smell came, sometimes while going up or down the elevator, would stop on the 2nd floor without anyone pressing the button inside the elevators. And the door would open, but no one would be there. This again usually only happened at night, and I didn't experience it alone as my mother was there twice. I found out that the man actually lived one apartment below us to the right, which is the apartment closest to the elevator on the 2nd floor. And I can't help but wonder if I had only stepped out of the elevator, if I could have realised that the smell was coming from below, and not above as I had thought, and brought this to the attention of someone like I should have done the second I smelled it the first time. I know it may sound like I'm reaching, or trying to justify or come up with a reason to explain it in my head, but I feel like this guy was trying to get me notice in a way, so he could be laid to rest peacefully. And I had all the pieces but didn't put them together until it was too late. I feel like I failed in a way, and I can't help but feel guilty. I definitely feel like he was trying to communicate with someone, not just me specifically, but anyone. I burst into tears when my mom told me I'd been correct on thinking there was a body and knowing he went all that time without anyone checking on him. My mother said he's probably happy in heaven that someone down here is crying for him, and that helped me a bit, but I can't help but feel so guilty. I'm wondering if there's anything I can do, anything I can leave or say that might help him be at ease if he's still here spiritually. I don't even know his name, but I want to do something for him, but I don't know what to do. I'm all over the place. Sorry for that, but I don't know what to do or where to turn.